During my engagement party, a woman walked in and handed me a manila envelope. Before I could ask who she was, she vanished into the crowd. I opened the seal and my heart shattered into a million pieces. My fiancé rushed toward me, but when he saw the document inside, his eyes filled with tears. He was not crying out of regret. He was crying because he knew his life was over. I did not say a single word. I simply turned around and walked away. By midnight, I had initiated a hostile takeover of his family company. My name is Audrey, and at 33 years old, I thought I had found my happily ever after. As a forensic accountant, I spend my days uncovering hidden financial rot for major corporations, yet somehow I miss the corruption standing right in front of me in my own relationship. Before I tell you how I dismantled my fiancé's entire legacy in less than 48 hours, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit subscribe and like this video if you have ever had to remind someone exactly who you are. The nightmare began inside the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza in Boston. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, casting a warm glow on 200 of the city's elite. I was wearing a vintage white silk gown that had belonged to my grandmother. It was simple, elegant, and to me, it was priceless. However, to my future mother-in-law, Genevieve, it was nothing more than a rag. She glided toward me holding a full glass of Cabernet Sauvignon, her eyes scanning my outfit with open disdain. "Audrey, darling," she said loudly enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Did the airline lose your luggage? You surely did not intend to wear that thrift store find to an event of this caliber. Look at you standing next to Preston. It is like seeing a maid standing next to a prince." I took a deep breath, smoothing the silk at my waist. I smiled politely and said, "Thank you for your concern, Genevieve, but elegance does not come from a price tag, it comes from character." Her eyes narrowed. She took a step closer, and suddenly her wrist flicked. It was not a stumble, it was a calculated move. The dark red wine splashed across my chest, blooming like a wound on the white fabric. The music seemed to stop. The room went silent. Genevieve did not even pretend to be shocked. She laughed, a cold, brittle sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh dear," she said, smirking. "Consider it a favor, Audrey. Now you have a valid excuse to go upstairs and change into something that does not embarrass my son." It was a necessary accident. I felt the cold liquid seeping through to my skin. The old Audrey might have run away in tears, but looking at her malicious grin, something inside me shifted. I remained perfectly still. I waved a waiter over and spoke calmly. "Please bill the dry cleaning service to Genevieve's personal suite. Make sure it is the rush service for antique silk." Just then, Preston appeared through the crowd. I expected him to be furious. I expected him to defend me. He looked at the stain on my dress, then looked at his mother who was winking at him. "Come on, Audrey." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Do not make a scene. Mom is just stressed about the family image. You know how much this night means to us. Just go clean yourself up. You are ruining the aesthetic of the party." I looked at the man I was supposed to marry in 2 months. He was not worried about me. He was worried about the pictures. That was the moment the blindfold fell off. But before I could respond, the double doors swung open and the woman with the envelope walked in. Preston cleared his throat, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal flute. The room hushed immediately. He flashed that $1,000,000 smile, the one that had fooled me for 3 years. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice dripping with rehearsed emotion. "To my beautiful bride Audrey. She is the most patient, understanding woman I know." The crowd applauded politely, unaware that he had just practically ordered me to hide my face upstairs like a naughty child. I stood frozen, my hand clutching the wine-stained fabric at my chest. I felt less like a partner and more like a prop in his stage play. He raised his glass higher, to a lifetime of happiness and shared dreams. But before anyone could drink, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom slammed open. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Heads turned in unison. A woman in a beige trench coat was struggling against 2 burly security guards. Her hair was messy and her eyes were wild with desperation. It was Sienna. I recognized her immediately. She used to be the executive assistant at Preston's family company before she was abruptly fired last month for alleged incompetence. "Let me go!" she screamed, kicking at a guard's shin. She locked eyes with me across the room. It was not a look of hatred. It was a look of urgent terror. "Audrey, do not do it. Do not sign that marriage license." Preston dropped his champagne glass. It shattered, sending shards of crystal and liquid skittering across the dance floor. "Get her out of here!" He roared, his face losing all its color. His composure cracked completely. He looked terrified. Sienna broke free for a split second, just long enough to reach into her coat. She lunged forward and hurled a thick manila envelope toward me. It spun through the air and landed with a heavy thud right at my feet. It slid across the polished floor, stopping inches from my stained dress. "Read it," she yelled as the guards grabbed her arms again, dragging her backward. "Read it before you ruin your life. Your husband has already sold you out. You are just a paycheck to them, Audrey. Run while you still can." The doors slammed shut, cutting off her voice, but her words hung in the silence like smoke. The room was deadly quiet. 200 pairs of eyes shifted from the closed doors to me, and then to the envelope lying on the floor. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at Preston. He was not looking at me. He was staring at that envelope with the same expression a man has when he looks at a loaded gun. The room was so silent that I could hear the air conditioning humming overhead. Preston stood frozen, his face pale as a sheet. I bent down and picked up the envelope. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than a few photographs should be. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a sudden chilling realization that my life was about to pivot. I tore the seal open. The sound of ripping paper echoed like a gunshot in the quiet ballroom. I pulled out the contents. The guests leaned in, expecting to see grainy photos of a mistress, or perhaps a secret child. But what I held in my hands was far more sinister. It was a stack of legal documents. At the top of the first page in bold font were the words, "Petition for conservatorship over the person and estate of Audrey Vance." My breath hitched. I am a forensic accountant. I read legal documents for a living. I know exactly what this meant. A conservatorship is a legal concept reserved for the elderly or the severely mentally ill, giving a guardian total control over their life and finances. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the text with professional speed. It was a draft fully prepared and ready to be filed with the Massachusetts Probate Court. The petitioner was listed as Preston. The reason cited was acute paranoia and early-onset schizophrenia. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I turned to page 3. There, under the section labeled Evidence of Incapacity, was a signed affidavit from a Dr. Eris Thorne. I had never met a Dr. Thorne in my life, yet here was his signature certifying that he had treated me for 6 months and that I was a danger to my own financial well-being. I kept reading, my blood turning to ice. The document outlined the assets to be placed under Preston's control immediately after the court order. They had listed everything: my checking account, my retirement fund, and there at the bottom of the list was the item that made my vision blur with rage: the Vance Family Trust. They knew. Somehow they had found out about the inheritance I had kept hidden. I had downplayed my wealth for 3 years, pretending to be a simple salary earner because I wanted to be loved for who I am, not what I own. But they had dug into my background. They had found the trust fund, and instead of asking me about it, they had hatched a plan to steal it. The timeline was sickeningly clear. The filing date was set for next Tuesday, 3 days after our wedding. The plan was perfect. Marry me to secure the next of kin status, then declare me insane to take power of attorney. They were going to lock me away in a facility and drain my accounts dry while they lived in luxury. I looked up from the papers. The memories of the last 6 months flooded back, but now they looked different. Genevieve constantly asking if I felt tired or confused, Preston telling me I was imagining things when I noticed money missing from my wallet. It was not concern, it was gaslighting. They were planting the seeds of insanity so that when they finally trapped me, no one would believe me. I looked at the doctor's signature one last time. It was a forgery or a bribe, but it was the smoking gun. This was not just a betrayal of the heart. This was a criminal conspiracy. I slowly raised my eyes to meet Preston's. He was not looking at me with love or even apology. He was looking at the papers in my hand, calculating how much jail time they represented. Preston moved faster than I had ever seen him move before. He snatched the documents from my hands with such force that the edge of the paper sliced against my thumb. He did not tear them up. Instead, he clutched them to his chest like a shield, looking around frantically to see if anyone else had read the fine print. The guests were murmuring, their confusion growing by the second. "Give me that!" he hissed, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. He stepped into my personal space, blocking me from the view of the crowd. His face was flushed, not with shame, but with frustration. "Audrey, listen to me. You are overreacting. You do not understand finance. You are not equipped to handle that kind of wealth. The Vance Trust is complicated. You would lose it all in a year. You are emotional. You are soft. Dante and I simply set up a structure to protect you from yourself. We are doing this for your own good." I stared at him, and for the first time in 3 years I saw him clearly. There was no love in his eyes. There was only greed and a terrifying condescension. He did not deny the forgery. He did not apologize for the betrayal. He justified it. He truly believed that stealing my inheritance was an act of charity because in his mind, I was just a naive girl who needed a smart man to manage her life. He was already spending my money in his head. I looked down at my left hand. The engagement ring sparkled under the massive chandelier lights. For months I had worn it with pride, telling everyone how Preston had designed it himself. But I knew the truth. My friend who works in the jewelry district had tested it a week after the proposal. It was not a diamond. It was high-grade cubic zirconia worth $500 at most. He had told me it was a family heirloom worth 50 grand. I slowly slid the ring off my finger. The metal felt cold and light. Preston watched me, his mouth slightly open, expecting me to throw it at him or scream, or cause the scene his mother so desperately wanted to avoid. I did neither. I reached over to the high-top table beside us, where his unfinished glass of champagne sat. I held the ring over the bubbling golden liquid. The room seemed to hold its breath. With a simple flick of my fingers, I let it go. Plink. It hit the bottom of the glass with a satisfying little sound, sinking into the alcohol, just like our relationship. "Keep the ring, Preston," I said, my voice steady and cold enough to freeze the air between us. "It is a fake, just like you. And do not worry about my ability to manage money. You are going to find out just how capable I am very soon." The silence following the splash of the ring did not last long. From the shadows of the VIP section, 2 figures emerged. It was Caroline Preston's younger sister and her husband, Dante. Dante was a corporate shark disguised as a lawyer. He adjusted his silk tie and stepped between me and the exit, blocking my path with the imposing physical presence of a linebacker. Dante did not look at the ring sinking in the champagne. He looked straight at the envelope in my hand with predatory focus. His voice boomed across the ballroom, projecting authority. "Audrey, you are making a grave mistake. That envelope contains confidential trade secrets belonging to the Vance family holdings. If you walk out of these doors with it, I will have you arrested for corporate espionage and theft of proprietary material within the hour." A gasp rippled through the room. I almost laughed out loud. He was brilliant, I had to give him that. He knew he could not admit what was actually in the papers, so he spun a lie so outrageous that everyone immediately believed it. To the wealthy elite in this room, stealing money was forgivable, but stealing company secrets was a cardinal sin. Caroline chimed in, linking her arm through Preston's, acting the part of the supportive sister. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust, shaking her head theatrically. "Oh, Audrey, we tried to help you. We tried to welcome you into this family despite your lack of pedigree. And this is how you repay us, by stealing from my brother on his engagement night. You really are trash, just like Mother said." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The shock turned into open hostility. These people were not my friends. They were Preston's associates, his investors, and his social circle. I heard the whispers starting like a hive of angry bees closing in on me. "I knew she was a gold digger," one woman hissed loudly from the front table. I saw her earlier trying to act like she belonged. Another voice from the back shouted, "Call the police! She is clearly unstable. Look at her face!" I stood alone in the center of the ballroom, 200 people against one. My face burned, not with shame, but with the realization of how perfectly they had set this stage. If I showed the papers now, I would look like a lunatic ranting about conspiracies. If I ran, I would look like a thief fleeing the scene. Dante crossed his arms, a smug smile playing on his lips. He took a step closer, invading my personal space. "Hand it over, Audrey. Do not make us call security to strip search you. We are trying to save you from a felony charge here. Be a good girl and give it back." He thought he had checkmated me. He thought the fear of a lawsuit and public shaming would make me hand over the evidence and crumble. He was used to bullying people who did not know the law. But he forgot one crucial detail. I do not just know the law. I hunt people who hide behind it. I did not hand the envelope to Dante. Instead, I sidestepped him and walked straight to the small stage where the wedding band had been playing. I grabbed the microphone from its stand. The high-pitched feedback screeched for a split second, cutting through the murmurs and silencing the room instantly. I looked out at the sea of judgmental faces, then turned my gaze to Dante, who was now looking less smug and more nervous. "Confidential trade secrets," I said, my voice booming through the speakers, echoing off the high ceilings. "Is that what we are calling this now, Dante? Because according to the header on page 1, this is not a business plan. It is a petition to strip me of my human rights based on a falsified psychological evaluation." I heard a collective gasp ripple through the room. I did not stop. I locked eyes with the man who had just threatened me with jail time. I held the document up for everyone to see. "You just stood there and claimed this document belongs to the Vance family company." I continued, my voice steady and lethal. "You claimed it is proprietary material. So tell me, Dante, did you just admit to 200 witnesses that plotting to institutionalize a sane woman to steal her inheritance is your official corporate strategy?" Dante froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The blood drained from his face so fast, he looked like a corpse. He realized too late that he had walked right into his own trap. By claiming ownership of the document to accuse me of theft, he had inadvertently claimed ownership of the crime. The hostility in the room evaporated instantly, replaced by a thick, suffocating shock. The guests who had just been sneering at me now looked at the Vance family with horror. The social tide had turned. They were wealthy, but they were not criminals, and what I had just described was a felony. I dropped the microphone. It hit the wooden stage with a heavy thud that sounded like a gavel closing a court case. I stepped down and the crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. No one dared to touch me. No one dared to look me in the eye. I walked toward the double doors, my head high, clutching the evidence against my chest. I was 5 feet from the exit when a hand clamped onto my upper arm. It was not a gentle touch. It was violent and painful. I spun around to see Preston, his face twisted into an ugly mask of panic and rage. His fingers dug into my skin, bruising me. "You are not going anywhere with that," he snarled through gritted teeth, his facade of the perfect gentleman completely gone. "Give it to me, Audrey, or I swear you will regret it." He yanked me backward, trying to physically wrestle the papers from my grip in front of everyone. I looked down at his hand gripping my arm. It was the same hand that had held mine during movies, and the same hand that had placed a ring on my finger. Now, it felt like a shackle. The adrenaline that had propelled me onto the stage was fading, and in its place was a cold, hard clarity. I did not struggle. I did not try to pull away. I simply leaned in close until my face was inches from his. "If you do not let go of me right now," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I will scream. And given what I just revealed to this room, who do you think they will believe? The grieving fiancé, or the man who just tried to steal her inheritance? Do you really want to add assault to your list of felonies tonight?" Preston hesitated. His eyes darted around the room. He saw the stairs. He saw the cell phones raised in the air, recording every second of our altercation. The fear of public ruin outweighed his desperation to silence me. His fingers loosened. I pulled my arm free and smoothed the fabric of my ruined dress. I did not look back at him. I did not look back at Genevieve, who was now frantically trying to explain herself to a group of skeptical investors. I walked straight through the double doors and out into the cool night air of Copley Square. The noise of the party faded instantly, replaced by the sounds of city traffic. A black sedan was idling at the curb, just as I had arranged. The driver stepped out and opened the door for me. I slid into the leather-back seat and the heavy door thudded shut, sealing me inside a quiet sanctuary. Most women would be crying right now. Most women would be hyperventilating over the end of a 3-year relationship and the public humiliation of a failed engagement. But as the car pulled away from the hotel, merging into the Boston traffic, I touched my cheek. It was dry. There were no tears. There was only a sense of immense relief. The weight of the lie I had been living was finally gone. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my secure phone. It was not the personal phone Preston monitored. It was my work phone, the one connected to the encrypted servers of my firm. I dialed a number I had memorized long ago. It rang once before a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Thorne speaking." "Mr. Thorne," I said, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past. "It is Audrey." There was a pause on the other end. "Is it done?" "Yes," I replied. They took the bait. Preston and Dante attempted to serve me with the conservatorship papers tonight. I have the physical copy in my possession, and I have multiple witnesses to their intent. The trap has been sprung. Good, Thorne said, his tone shifting from attorney to general. "Are you safe?" "I am fine. I am on my way to the safe house now. But I want to move forward immediately." I took a deep breath. This was the moment of no return. Once I gave this order, there was no going back. I would not just be leaving Preston. I would be destroying him. Activate Phase 1. I commanded, my voice steady. Contact the bank. I want to buy the entirety of the Vance family corporate debt. Use the shell company we set up. Offer them 10 cents on the dollar if you have to, but get it done. I want to be the majority creditor of their company by the time the sun rises tomorrow. Understood, Audrey Thorne replied. I will have the papers ready for your digital signature within the hour. Do you want me to warn them? No. I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips. Let them sleep. Let them think they just had a bad party. I want them to wake up and realize they are living in a house they no longer own. I hung up the phone and leaned back against the seat. The ring finger on my left hand felt light. I watched the city of Boston roll by, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel like a victim. I felt like the hunter. The lion's den was behind me. Now the hunt began. The black sedan glided into the private underground garage of the Millennium Tower. This building was not just a residence. It was a fortress. The security guard nodded respectfully as I stepped out, not asking why I was wearing a wine-stained gown at 10 in the evening. He knew me only as Miss Vance, the owner of the penthouse suite, not as the pushover fiancée Preston had paraded around for 3 years. I took the private elevator straight to the 45th floor. As the doors slid open, I stepped into a world Preston never knew existed. He thought I lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Cambridge, a place I rented solely to maintain my cover. He never knew that for the last 5 years, I have owned the entire top floor of the city's most exclusive address. The apartment was cool and dark, smelling of expensive leather and polished wood. I kicked off my heels and unzipped the ruined dress, letting it fall to the floor in a heap of white silk. I stepped over it without a second glance. That dress belonged to the old Audrey. The woman who was about to sit down at the desk was someone else entirely. I walked into my study and placed my hand on the biometric scanner. The wall of monitors hummed to life, flooding the room with a cold blue light. On the shelf behind me sat my credentials framed in glass. Certified Fraud Examiner of the Year. Top Forensic Auditor for the Department of Justice. People think forensic accounting is just spreadsheets and calculators. They are wrong. It is hunting. It is understanding that money always leaves a trail and that greed makes people sloppy. I have taken down cartels and corrupt senators. Preston and his mother were amateurs compared to the monsters I usually fight. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and cracked my knuckles. A month ago, I had noticed small irregularities in our shared household account. Strange withdrawals. $500 here, 1,000 there. A normal fiancé would have asked about it. But I am not a normal fiancé. I am a woman who catches CEOs embezzling millions. I did not ask questions. I gathered intelligence. I typed in a complex encryption key, and the central screen shifted to a live audio waveform. 3 weeks ago, while Preston was sleeping, I had installed a mirror software on his phone. He thought it was a standard system update. In reality, it turned his device into a remote listening post. Wherever his phone went, I went. Whatever he said, I heard. I adjusted the frequency and boosted the gain on the microphone. The speakers crackled with static for a moment before the sounds of the ballroom filtered through. I could hear the clinking of glasses and the low murmur of the crowd. Then the audio focused in. The software isolated the voices closest to the device. I leaned back, watching the sound waves spike as familiar voices filled my silent apartment. They thought they had won. They thought I was crying in a taxi. They had no idea I was the audience for their victory speech. The audio feed crackled for a second before stabilizing into a crystal-clear digital stream. The visualization on my screen spiked with jagged red lines as Dante's booming laugh filled my quiet study. Through the speakers, I could hear the distinct sound of expensive crystal clinking together. They were not mourning the end of an engagement. They were celebrating a victory. "Relax," Preston Dante said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You look like you just saw a ghost." It was a bluff, a desperate theatrical bluff from a woman who knows she is out of her depth. "But she had the papers," Dante Preston replied, his voice shaking slightly. "She had the draft. If she goes to the ethics board with that, I could lose my license. You could be disbarred." Dante laughed again, louder this time. The sound was grating. "Who is she going to go to? She is a nobody. She is a low-level bean counter at a mid-tier firm. She spends her days checking expense reports for lunch receipts. She does not have the connections or the capital to fight us." I watched the waveform dance across my monitor. A low-level bean counter. That was what I had let them believe. They had no idea that the mid-tier firm I worked for was actually a cover for the Department of Justice's Special Investigations Unit. "Listen to me," Dante continued, the sound of him pouring another drink echoing through the feed. "Tomorrow morning at 9 sharp, I am filing a countersuit. We will hit her with defamation, corporate espionage, and theft of proprietary information. I have a judge in my pocket who will sign an emergency injunction to freeze her assets before lunch." "Freeze her assets?" Preston asked, sounding hopeful. "Everything," Dante confirmed. "Her checking account, her savings, that little payroll account she uses to pay rent. By tomorrow evening, her cards will be declined. She will not be able to buy a cup of coffee, let alone hire a lawyer. She lives paycheck to paycheck, Preston. Without access to her money, she will be desperate." I leaned back in my chair, my eyes narrowing. They thought my entire net worth was in the Wells Fargo checking account I used for groceries. They did not know about the offshore holdings, the diversified portfolio, or the blind trusts. "She will come crawling back," Dante sneered. "Give it 48 hours. When she realizes she cannot pay rent on that little apartment in Cambridge, she will come to you on her knees begging for forgiveness. And when she does, we will have her sign the real conservatorship papers. We will tell her it is the only way to drop the lawsuit." Genevieve chimed in, her voice shrill and satisfied. "Good. That girl always had too much pride for someone with such cheap shoes. I told you she was unstable. Once we have control of her trust fund, we can finally renovate the summer house in the Hamptons." I reached out and adjusted the volume knob, turning it down slightly. I had heard enough. They were planning to starve me out. They were banking on my poverty. They were so confident in their power, so sure of their superiority, that they had forgotten the first rule of war. Know your enemy. Dante was right about one thing. Someone was going to be desperate by tomorrow evening. Someone was going to have their assets frozen. But it was not going to be me. I picked up my phone and sent a single text message to my legal team. "Execute Phase 2. Target the payroll accounts. Let's see how they like living paycheck to paycheck." I sat there in the dark, illuminated only by the blue glow of the monitors. On the screen, Preston loosened his tie, looking less like a master manipulator and more like a cornered animal. He poured another drink, his hands shaking slightly. The arrogance he had displayed at the party was dissolving into a sloppy, drunken panic. "You do not understand, Dante," he slurred, slamming his glass down on the mahogany coffee table. "It is not just about the trust fund. I needed that marriage license signed tonight. I needed power of attorney over her existing assets immediately." Dante looked up from his phone, clearly annoyed. "Why are you so pressed? We will get the court order. A few weeks does not make a difference." "It makes a difference to me," Preston shouted. He ran a hand through his hair, pulling at the roots. "I had a buyer lined up for that useless plot of land her grandmother left her in the Berkshires. A cash offer. $200,000. I was supposed to close the deal on Monday, using her signature." My heart went cold. That land was not useless. It was where my grandmother had taught me how to plant hydrangeas. It was the only place on earth where I felt safe as a child. Preston knew that. He knew how much that cottage meant to me. And yet, he had already arranged to sell it behind my back, like it was nothing more than a bargaining chip. "Why the rush?" Preston Dante asked, his voice dropping an octave. "What kind of trouble are you in?" Preston sank onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. "It is the bookies, Dante. The playoffs last month. I bet big and I lost big. I am in the hole for 200 grand. They gave me until Friday. If I do not pay, they are not going to sue me. They are going to break my legs." I stared at the screen. The silence in my apartment was deafening. For 3 years, I thought Preston was stressed because of work. I thought his mood swings were because of the pressure of running a company. I had spent nights rubbing his back, making him tea, listening to his lies about market volatility. But it was never about the market. It was about gambling. He did not love me. He did not even hate me. To him, I was just a walking ATM machine. I was the collateral for his addiction. Every "I love you" he had ever whispered was actually a calculation. He was looking at me and seeing a way to pay off a sports bet. A single tear threatened to fall, but I wiped it away before it could track down my cheek. That was it. That was the moment the last ember of affection died. I looked at the man on the screen and I felt nothing. The pain in my chest evaporated, replaced by a clinical, icy resolve. He was no longer my fiancé. He was a target, and he had just given me the ammunition I needed to bury him. I picked up my phone again. I did not just want to freeze his assets. I wanted to cut off his escape route. I typed a new message to my team. "Flag the deed to the Berkshire property. Ensure no unauthorized transfers can occur. And find out who holds his gambling debt. I want to buy that debt too. If anyone is going to break him, it is going to be me." The morning sun hit the glass facade of the Harrison and Moyle building, creating a blinding reflection that felt like a spotlight. I adjusted my sunglasses and walked toward the revolving doors. I was wearing a sharp navy blazer and trousers, an outfit chosen not for a day of auditing spreadsheets, but for a day of war. To the world, I was just an employee arriving for work. To the men who tried to destroy me, I was about to become a nightmare. I approached the security turnstile and tapped my ID badge against the sensor. Usually it would let out a cheerful chirp and swing open. Today, it let out a harsh, low buzz. A small red light flashed rapidly. "Access denied." I tapped it again. "Access denied. Don't bother Audrey." A familiar deep voice echoed across the marble lobby. "You are not getting in." I turned slowly. Leaning against a massive stone pillar near the elevators was Dante. He looked impeccable in a charcoal suit, holding a cup of coffee as if he owned the building. He pushed himself off the pillar and walked toward me, his shoes clicking rhythmically on the polished floor. He did not look tired from the previous night's drama. He looked energized by it. "I see you are an early riser, Dante," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I did not know you had business with my firm." "I make it my business when there is a security threat involved," he replied, stopping just inches from the turnstile. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. He did not hand it to me. He tossed it at my chest. It hit me with a soft thud and slid to the floor. "You are fired, Audrey. Effective immediately." I looked down at the envelope, then back at him. "On what grounds?" "Corporate espionage," he said, loud enough for the morning rush of employees to hear. "I made a few calls to the partners this morning. I sent them proof that you were accessing unauthorized client data. They did not even hesitate. Your access is revoked, your company laptop has been remotely wiped, and security has been instructed to escort you off the premises if you try to enter." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I told you last night. I warned you that you were out of your depth. Now you have no job. You have no income. And with a termination for cause on your record, you will never work in finance in this city again. You are finished." I looked at the red light on the turnstile. Dante had pulled strings. He had used his connections to fabricate a reason to fire me, thinking he was cutting off my oxygen. He thought this job was my lifeline. He thought without this paycheck I would starve. He had no idea that Harrison and Moyle was just a cover. He had no idea that the partners he spoke to were likely baffled, but went along with it because my real handler at the Department of Justice had instructed them to maintain my cover at all costs. Dante thought he had fired a clerk. In reality, he had just freed up my schedule to destroy him. I bent down and picked up the termination papers. I dusted them off and looked him in the eye. "You went to a lot of trouble for a low-level accountant, Dante," I said, forcing a tremor into my voice to feed his ego. "What am I going to do now?" Dante smirked, satisfied with my fear. "That is up to you, but if I were you, I would start looking for a cardboard box to live in. Or you can call Preston. He might still be willing to let you sign those papers if you beg hard enough." I turned around and walked toward the exit, clutching the papers. I did not look back. If he had looked closely, he would have seen that I was not trembling with fear. I was suppressing a smile. He had just given me the perfect grounds for a wrongful termination lawsuit to add to the pile. The trap was set. Now it was time to snap it shut. I walked across the street to a small artisanal roastery called The Grind. It was the kind of place where bankers and lawyers grabbed their morning fuel before destroying companies. I ordered a black coffee and sat at a small round table by the window. I did not have to wait long. Just as I predicted, Dante followed me. Men like him cannot resist a victory lap. He needed to see the fear in my eyes to feel truly satisfied. He slid into the chair opposite me uninvited. He placed his elbows on the table and leaned in his expensive cologne, overpowering the smell of roasted beans. He looked at my coffee cup and then at my face, searching for tears that were not there. "You are shockingly calm for a woman who just lost everything," Dante sneered. "Do you not understand what just happened? You are done. You are going to be blacklisted from every firm on the East Coast." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The liquid was hot and bitter, just the way I like it. I set the cup down without making a sound. "I understand perfectly, Dante. You think you have cut my strings." He laughed, a short barking sound that made the barista look over. "I did cut your strings, Audrey. You were a puppet, and now you are a broken puppet. Who do you think you are trying to fight us? You are a nobody. You are an orphan with no name, no money, and no history. You came from nothing, and you will go back to nothing." He pointed a manicured finger at his own chest. "My family is an institution. We are the bedrock of Boston. The Vance name is a symbol of power and integrity. We built this city. You are just a parasite trying to feed off our legacy." I looked at him. I looked at the man who thought his bloodline made him untouchable. It was time to shatter his delusion. "A symbol," I repeated, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Is that what you call it? Because when I look at the Vance family ledger, I do not see a symbol of power. I see a liability." Dante stopped laughing. His eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I leaned forward, mimicking his posture. "I am talking about the $15 million in debt that your family company is currently carrying. I am talking about the 3 construction loans that are 90 days past due. I am talking about the fact that your liquidity is so low that you cannot even pay the cleaning staff on time." Dante's face twitched. "How do you know that?" "That is private financial data." I ignored his question and continued, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "And let us not forget the most interesting part. To cover the interest payments on those loans, you started dipping into the employee pension fund last February. You moved $200,000 from the retirement accounts into the operating budget. That is not just bad business, Dante. That is embezzlement. That is a federal crime." I watched the color drain from his face. The arrogance vanished instantly, replaced by a look of pure terror. He looked around the coffee shop, suddenly realizing that he was not the predator in this conversation. He was the prey. "You think you are a Boston icon?" I said, leaning back and picking up my coffee again. "But to me, you just look like a man who is about to trade his bespoke suit for an orange jumpsuit." "Enjoy your coffee, Dante. It might be the last good one you have for a long time." The blood drained from Dante's face so quickly, it was as if I had pulled a plug. For a man who prided himself on being the apex predator of the corporate world, he looked remarkably fragile in that moment. The silence that stretched between us was heavy and suffocating. He opened his mouth to speak but closed it again, his composure shattering like glass under the weight of my accusation. Then, the rage took over. He slammed his hand down on the table with a force that made the ceramic mugs jump. Coffee sloshed over the rim, staining the white tablecloth brown. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet morning atmosphere of the shop, causing conversation at nearby tables to cease instantly. "Shut your mouth!" he roared, losing all pretense of being a civilized attorney. He began to rise from his seat, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the table. His body language was unmistakable. He was going to lunge at me. The veneer of the sophisticated lawyer had stripped away, revealing the thug underneath. He looked ready to drag me out of the chair and silence me with his bare hands. I did not flinch. I did not recoil. I simply raised my chin and locked eyes with him, showing him that his physical intimidation meant nothing to me. "Sit down, Dante," I commanded, my voice cutting through his anger like a scalpel. "Look behind you. Up in the corner." He paused, confused by my lack of fear. His eyes flicked to where I was pointing. The red light of the security camera blinked steadily in the corner of the ceiling, directly focused on our table. "That is a high-definition camera with audio capability." I continued, keeping my tone conversational. "If you so much as graze my sleeve, you will be adding assault and battery to your indictment. Do you really want to spend tonight in a holding cell before the FBI even gets to you?" Dante froze. The reality of his situation crashed down on him. He slowly sank back into his chair, but his eyes remained fixed on me, filled with a venomous hatred. He leaned across the table, invading my personal space, his voice dropping to a sinister hiss that made the hair on my arms stand up. "You think you are clever, don't you? You think a few numbers on a spreadsheet make you safe? You are playing a dangerous game, little girl. You know too much. Accidents happen in this city every day. People walk into traffic, brakes fail. You should be very careful about opening that mouth of yours." It was a threat, a direct and violent threat against my life. I smiled. It was the smile of someone holding a royal flush. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and withdrew my phone. I tapped the screen, waking it up. The voice memo app was open, and the waveform was pulsating in time with the background music of the cafe. "I am always careful, Dante," I said, turning the screen so he could see the timer counting up. "I just recorded a senior partner at a law firm threatening a witness and admitting to embezzlement. And just so we are clear, this audio file has already been uploaded to a secure cloud server. If anything happens to me, if I trip on the sidewalk or cut my finger, this recording goes directly to the district attorney." Dante stared at the phone as if it were a bomb. His jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. He realized he had just handed me the final nail for his coffin. "You are a monster," he whispered, his voice trembling with impotent rage. "No, Dante," I said, standing up and tossing a $5 bill onto the table for the coffee I did not drink. "I am justice, and I am coming for everything." I turned and walked out into the bright Boston sunlight, leaving him sitting in the ruins of his own arrogance. I checked my watch. Phase 2 was complete. Now it was time to let the rats turn on each other. By the time I reached my temporary office, a sleek co-working space in the financial district, my phone was vibrating so intensely it felt like a living thing in my hand. I pulled it out, expecting a call from Dante's firm trying to offer a settlement. But it was not a call, it was a notification storm. Instagram, Facebook, text messages from numbers I did not recognize. They were rolling in like a tsunami crashing against the shore of my digital life. I unlocked the screen and opened the first message. You are a sick, twisted person. How could you do that to Preston after everything he gave you? I opened another. Thief. Liar. I hope you rot in jail for what you did. I did not have to look far to find the source of this sudden hatred. At the very top of my feed was a post from Genevieve Vance. It had been up for less than an hour and it already had over 3,000 likes and hundreds of sympathetic comments. It was a photo of her and Preston hugging. He looked devastated, his head on her shoulder while she looked bravely into the camera. The caption was a masterpiece of fiction. Friends and family, please pray for my son Preston. We are heartbroken to announce that his engagement is off. We recently discovered that Audrey has been struggling with severe mental health issues, including paranoid delusions and violent outbursts. Last night, she had a breakdown, stole a significant amount of cash from our family safe, and fled into the night. To make matters worse, we have since found proof that she has been unfaithful throughout their relationship. We only wanted to help her get the treatment she needs, but she is dangerous. Please, if you see her, do not approach. Contact the police immediately. I sat there reading the words that were designed to incinerate my reputation. She had checked every box to ensure I would be a social pariah. Mental instability, grand larceny, adultery. She was painting me as a villain so that when I eventually tried to expose their financial crimes, no one would believe me. It was a scorched earth tactic. She wanted to isolate me socially before Dante crushed me legally. A normal person would panic. A normal woman would deactivate her accounts, hide under the covers, and cry until her eyes were swollen. But I am not a normal woman. I am a forensic auditor. I know that in the eyes of the law, a social media post is not just gossip, it is a publication. And when you publish false statements of fact that damage someone's reputation to a third party, that is called libel. And when you accuse someone of a crime they did not commit, that is defamation per se. I did not block her. I did not report the post for bullying. I let it stay up. I wanted every share and every nasty comment to be recorded. I took high-resolution screenshots of everything, the caption, the timestamp, the comments from her high society friends calling me trash. I opened my encrypted email and attached the files, sending them directly to Mr. Thorne with the subject line, Defamation Case Evidence Exhibit A through Z. I typed a quick note to my lawyer. Genevieve just accused me of grand larceny and adultery on a public forum with zero proof. She has reached a massive audience. Add a civil suit for defamation of character to the pile. I want maximum damages. I want her to have to sell her jewelry to pay the settlement. I hit send and leaned back in my chair, watching the hate messages continue to scroll across my lock screen. They were flailing. They were throwing everything they had at the wall, hoping something would stick. But they had forgotten that the internet is written in ink. Genevieve thought she was ruining my life. In reality, she was just writing me a blank check for her entire net worth. The GPS led me to a rusting self-storage facility near the South Boston docks. It was the kind of place where people kept things they wanted to forget. The rain was coming down in sheets, hammering against the roof of my car. I saw a lone figure standing under the overhang of Unit 42. It was Sienna. She was wearing the same trench coat from the party, but now she looked less like a crasher and more like a soldier who had lost her army. I parked the car and stepped out. Opening my umbrella, Sienna flinched when she saw me, but she did not run. She held a heavy waterproof bag against her chest. Her knuckles were white. "You actually came," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I thought you would be too busy dealing with the lawyers." "I do not hide from my allies, Sienna," I replied, stopping a few feet away. "You saved me last night. Now tell me why." Sienna let out a shaky breath. "Dante fired me because I refused to shred a box of files during the audit last month. He told everyone I was stealing office supplies. He ruined my reputation. I have applied to 20 firms and no one will hire me. I have a sick mother, Audrey. I needed that insurance." She unzipped the bag and pulled out a thick black ledger. It was old school, bound in leather. Dante was paranoid about hackers, so he kept his darkest secrets on paper, thinking it was safer. He was wrong. Paper trails are the hardest to erase. "He thought I shredded it," she whispered, handing it to me. He watched me put it in the bin. He did not know I emptied the bin into my purse 5 minutes later. I opened the book. I turned on my phone's flashlight and illuminated the pages. My eyes scanned the rows of numbers, and my heart rate slowed into a steady, rhythmic beat of pure satisfaction. It was all there. The pension fund embezzlement was just the tip of the iceberg. There were wire transfers to shell companies in Panama, fake consulting fees paid to entities that did not exist, tax evasion on a scale that would make the IRS weep with joy. This was not just corporate malfeasance, this was international money laundering. Dante had been cleaning money for someone, and he was using the family business as a laundromat. "This is it," I said, closing the book and looking at her. "This is the smoking gun. With this, I can not only sue them, I can put Dante in federal prison for 20 years. Sienna looked down at her shoes. "I just wanted you to have it. I cannot use it. I am nobody. But you can hurt them. Just promise me you will make it hurt." I looked at this woman who had risked everything to do the right thing. She was smart, brave, and loyal, qualities that the Vance family completely lacked. "I am not just going to hurt them, Sienna," I said. "I am going to bury them. But I cannot do it alone. I need someone who knows where the rest of the bodies are buried." She looked up confused. "What do you mean? You are currently unemployed, correct?" I asked. She nodded, wiping rain from her face. "Like I said, no one will hire me." I pulled a business card from my pocket. It was my real card, the one with my true title. Senior Forensic Auditor. "You work for me now," I said. "What was Dante paying you?" $45,000 a year?" she stammered. "I will pay you $225,000, I said effortlessly, plus full benefits and a signing bonus once Dante is in handcuffs. Your job is simple. Be my eyes and ears. Help me dismantle everything they have built. Do we have a deal?" Sienna stared at me, shock replacing the fear in her eyes. She slowly reached out and took the card. A smile appeared on her face, a sharp, dangerous smile that matched my own. "When do I start?" "Right now," I said, opening the car door for her. "Get in. We have a hostile takeover to plan." The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets of Boston slick and reflective under the streetlights. I sat in the car with Sienna, the black ledger resting heavy on my lap. We had the nuclear option in our hands. The evidence in this book was enough to send Dante away for life and strip the Vance family of every asset they owned. But simply handing it over to the FBI was not enough. I needed them to sign their own death warrants first. I needed to see the look in their eyes when they realized they had lost. "It is time for the final performance," I told Sienna, handing her the ledger. "Keep this safe. If I am not out in 2 hours, deliver it to Agent Miller at the Bureau." I pulled out my old personal iPhone, the one I knew Preston was still monitoring. I cracked the screen slightly on the dashboard to make it look like it had been through a struggle. I took a deep breath, channeling the version of myself they wanted me to be. The weak, dependent Audrey. The Audrey who needed a man to survive. I typed the message, my fingers trembling not from fear, but from anticipation. "Preston, please. I am scared. My cards are declined at the hotel. I have no cash and nowhere to go. I just want to fix this. Can we please talk?" I hit send. I watched the screen, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3. The 3 dots appeared immediately. He had been waiting by his phone. He had been waiting for the moment I broke. "Come to the house," he replied. 8 p.m. sharp, alone, do not bring anyone." I showed the screen to Sienna. She smirked, a dark, satisfied expression that mirrored my own. They took the bait. I could only imagine the scene inside the Vance estate right now. Through my surveillance feed earlier, I knew they were on the edge of their seats. Now that the text had arrived, the tension would have broken into jubilation. Genevieve was probably pouring the good scotch, the 30-year-old single malt she saved for special occasions. She would be telling Preston, "I told you so." She would be saying that girls like me always come crawling back when the money runs dry. Dante was likely drafting the final documents, the ironclad non-disclosure agreements and the transfer of deeds. They were celebrating. They thought they had broken the wild horse. They thought I was coming to beg for scraps, to plead for a place to sleep. They had absolutely no idea that I was not walking into a surrender. I was walking into a hostile takeover. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I messed up my hair slightly, rubbed my eyes until they looked red and puffy. I practiced my posture, slumping my shoulders to look defeated. The disguise was perfect. "Drive me to the mansion," I told the driver, "and wait around the corner. I have a feeling this meeting is going to be short." As the car pulled away from the curb, I felt a cold calm settle over me. Tonight the Vance family was throwing a victory party. Tomorrow they would be holding a wake for their legacy, and the guest of honor was on her way. The iron gates of the Vance estate loomed ahead, towering over the neighborhood like a fortress of old money. The driveway was lined with imported Italian cypress trees that likely cost more than most people's college tuition. I told the taxi driver to drop me at the gate so I could walk the rest of the way in the rain. I needed to look pathetic. I needed to look like a woman who had been completely defeated by the world. By the time I reached the massive oak front doors, my hair was plastered to my forehead, and my cheap cardigan was soaked through. I rang the doorbell. I did not have to wait long. The door swung open, revealing Genevieve. She was wearing a silk kimono that shimmered under the porch lights, and she held a crystal glass of scotch in one hand. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in a sneer of absolute triumph. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she said, taking a sip of her drink. "You look terrible, Audrey. Did the homeless shelter turn you away?" "Please, Genevieve," I said, keeping my head down and my voice trembling. "I have nowhere else to go. My cards are frozen. I have not eaten since yesterday. I just want to talk to Preston." She laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the night air. "You want to talk to him? After the stunt you pulled at the engagement party, you humiliated us. You tried to ruin our reputation, and now you come crawling back to the very people you spit on. You have some nerve." She moved to block the doorway, her body filling the space. "Preston is in the study with Dante. They are busy men. They do not have time for stray dogs. But I suppose since you are here we can hear you out. However, there are rules in this house." She pointed a manicured finger at her feet. She was wearing velvet slippers embroidered with gold thread. "You are tracking mud everywhere," she said, her voice dropping to a cold command. "I will not have filth walking on my marble floors. If you want to enter this house, you need to learn your place. Clean them." I looked at her confused. "You want me to take my shoes off?" "No," she smiled, cruel and sharp. "I want you to clean my shoes, right now. On your knees." My stomach churned. This was not about cleanliness. This was about dominance. She wanted to break me before I even stepped inside. She wanted to strip away every ounce of dignity I had left to ensure that when I signed those papers, I would be nothing more than a shell. I hesitated just for a second to sell the performance. Then I slowly lowered myself onto the wet concrete of the porch. The cold seeped into my knees. I reached out with the sleeve of my soaked cardigan and began to wipe the imaginary dust from her velvet slippers. "Good girl," Genevieve purred, looking down at me like I was a bug she had decided not to crush yet. "See how easy it is when you know your station. You were never one of us, Audrey. You were always destined to be on your knees." I kept my head bowed, hiding my face. She thought I was crying. She thought I was broken. She had no idea that I was fighting back the urge to laugh. Because directly in line with her face, hidden inside the top button of my cheap cardigan, was a high-definition micro-lens. It was recording every word, every sneer, and every second of this abuse. She was not just humiliating me. She was providing the jury with character evidence that would make them hate her. I finished wiping her shoes and looked up. "Can I come in now?" I whispered. Genevieve stepped back, satisfied with her power trip. "Get in. And do not touch the walls." I stood up and walked into the warmth of the mansion. As I crossed the threshold, I touched the button on my sweater, ensuring the camera was still rolling. The queen had had her fun. Now it was time to take her castle. The study smelled of expensive leather and stale cigar smoke. It was a room designed to intimidate, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with volumes no one in this family had ever read. Dante sat behind the massive mahogany desk, like a king holding court, while Preston stood by the fireplace, refusing to meet my eyes. Caroline was perched on the arm of a leather sofa, picking at her nails with bored indifference. "Sit," Dante commanded, pointing to a single wooden chair placed in the center of the room. It was lower than the others, designed to make whoever sat in it feel small. I sat down, clasping my hands together to hide the fact that I was not shaking. I looked at Preston, hoping for some sign of humanity, but he just took a long swallow of his scotch. "We have prepared a settlement agreement," Dante said, sliding a thick document across the polished desk. He did not offer me a pen. "We are willing to drop the corporate espionage charges. We will unfreeze your accounts, and we will even provide a small severance package to help you get back on your feet." I looked at the document. "What do you want in return?" Dante smiled a shark-like grin. "It is simple, really. You sign over the deed to the Berkshire property, the one your grandmother left you." My breath hitched. This was it, the extortion. "But that land is not worth anything to you," I stammered, my voice breaking perfectly. "It is just an old cottage. It is the only thing I have left of her. It is my sanctuary. Please, Dante, take the car, take the apartment lease, but let me keep the cottage." Preston finally spoke up, his voice thick with false sympathy. "Audrey, be reasonable. You cannot afford the property taxes anyway. We are doing you a favor taking it off your hands. We have a developer interested in the land. It is strictly business." "Strictly business," I repeated. "You are asking me to trade my family legacy for my freedom." Caroline let out a loud, exasperated sigh. She stood up and walked over to me, leaning down until I could smell her cloying perfume. "Sign it, you idiot," she hissed. "You do not have a choice. Do you really think you can fight us? You are broke. You are homeless. And frankly, you are lucky we are even offering you a way out. Most people would just let you rot in jail." She grabbed the pen from the desk and shoved it into my hand. Her fingers brushed against the button of my cardigan, right where the camera lens was hidden. She was so blinded by her own arrogance that she did not even notice. "Stop being a sentimental fool," Caroline continued. "It is just dirt. Sign the paper, give us the land, and disappear. It is the best offer you are going to get." I looked down at the paper. The terms were clear. Transfer of deed in exchange for dropping a lawsuit that had no merit in the first place. It was coercion, plain and simple. In the state of Massachusetts, signing a contract under duress renders it void. But signing a contract under duress while recording the people threatening you renders it a felony for them. I gripped the pen, my hand trembling theatrically. "If I sign this," I whispered, "will you promise to leave me alone?" Dante leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "Once that ink is dry, Audrey, you will never hear from us again." I uncapped the pen. "I hope you keep your word, Dante," I said, "because I always keep mine." The tip of the pen hovered over the signature line for a fraction of a second. To Dante, Preston, and Caroline, this hesitation looked like the last desperate resistance of a broken woman. They watched with bated breath, their eyes wide with greed, savoring the moment of my total surrender. But in my mind, I was not hesitating. I was calculating. I am a forensic accountant. I have spent a decade studying forgeries, coerced contracts, and handwriting analysis. I know that a signature is not just a name, it is a biometric key. And I also know that for high net worth individuals, banks require a specific consistent stroke pattern for high-value asset transfers. I lowered the pen and began to write. I formed the A of Audrey perfectly. I flowed through the U, the D, the R. But when I reached the final letters of my last name, I made a subtle, almost imperceptible change. Instead of my usual sharp upward slant on the final E, I looped it downward and added a tiny, heavy dot at the end. To the naked eye, it looked exactly like my signature. To the automated verification algorithms used by the county clerk and my bank, it would register as a mismatch. It was a distress signal written in ink. Legally, this document was now worthless. It was a contract signed under duress, with a non-conforming signature. I lifted the pen. "Done," I whispered, letting the pen roll out of my fingers onto the desk. Dante snatched the paper before the ink was even dry. He did not look at me. He scanned the bottom of the page, his eyes lighting up as he saw the ink. He laughed, a deep, guttural sound of pure triumph. "It is valid," Dante announced, handing the paper to Preston like a trophy. "We did it. The deed is ours." Preston grabbed the document with trembling hands. He looked at that piece of paper with more passion than he had ever looked at me in 3 years. He did not walk over to comfort his fiancée, who had just allegedly given up everything for him. He did not offer a hand to help me up from the chair. Instead, he brought the paper to his face. He pressed his lips against the signature line, kissing the ink with a sickening reverence. 200,000, Preston murmured into the paper, his eyes closed in ecstasy. We are saved. The bookies are off my back. He looked up then, and for a second, he seemed surprised to see I was still sitting there. His expression shifted instantly from joy to annoyance. The utility I provided was gone. Now I was just waste to be disposed of. Good girl, Preston said, his voice dripping with condescension. You finally did something useful for this family. Now get out of my sight. I stood up slowly, clutching my wet cardigan around me. Where do you want me to go, Preston? It is raining. He waved a hand dismissively toward the back of the house. The gardening shed is unlocked. There are some old burlap sacks in there. You can sleep on those. We have investors coming early tomorrow morning to view the estate, and I do not want you smelling up the main house with your wet dog look. Caroline giggled from the sofa. Make sure you lock the shed from the outside, Preston. We do not want her wandering back in to steal silver during the night. Preston nodded. Good point. He looked at me, his eyes cold and dead. Go to the shed, Audrey, and be grateful we are letting you stay on the property at all. I did not argue. I did not cry. I turned around and walked out of the study, leaving them to their celebration. As I closed the heavy oak door behind me, I heard the pop of a champagne cork. They were toasting to their victory. I walked through the kitchen and out the back door into the rain. The gardening shed was a small, rotting wooden structure at the edge of the property. It smelled of fertilizer and damp earth. I stepped inside and pulled the door shut. I waited until I heard Preston's footsteps on the gravel path outside. I heard the slide of the heavy iron bolt locking me in. I heard him walk away whistling a happy tune. I stood in the dark, surrounded by rusty shovels and bags of mulch. They thought they had locked me away like an animal. They thought I was trapped. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated my face in the darkness. The recording was saved. The camera on my cardigan had caught everything. The coercion, the insults, the admission of gambling debts, and the locking of the door. They had just added false imprisonment to the list. I sat down on a stack of potting soil bags and dialed a number. Thorne, I said when he answered. It is done. I signed the dummy document. They are celebrating. Are you safe? Thorne asked. I am locked in their gardening shed, I replied calmly. I heard the sound of a chair scraping against the floor on the other end of the line. I am sending the police. No, I said sharply. Not yet. Let them sleep. Let them dream of their money. I want to wake them up myself. Proceed with the acquisition. By the time that bolt slides open tomorrow morning, I want to own the ground they are standing on. I sat on the damp bags of potting soil, shivering slightly as the temperature dropped. The gardening shed was dark except for the sliver of light coming through the cracks in the wooden planks. I had just started to plan my next move when I heard the heavy iron bolt slide back. The door creaked open, letting in a gust of wind and rain. I expected to see Preston coming to gloat one last time. Instead, it was Caroline. She was holding a plastic trash bag, the one containing the few clothes I had brought with me for this charade. She did not hand it to me. With a flick of her wrist, she upended the bag, dumping my sweaters and toiletries directly onto the muddy ground outside the shed door. Oops, she said, her voice dripping with fake innocence. My hand slipped. She leaned against the door frame, shielding herself from the rain with a large umbrella while watching my belongings soak into the mud. She looked down at me, her face illuminated by the distant porch light. There was a cruelty in her eyes that went beyond simple greed. It was personal. She wanted to erase me. You know, Audrey, she said, smoothing her hand over her stomach. I almost feel bad for you. Almost. But then I remember what is at stake. She stepped closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. I am pregnant. I looked at her stomach. It was flat, concealed beneath her designer dress. I did not congratulate her. I did not react. Dante and I have been trying for months, she continued. And let us be honest, raising a child in our social circle is expensive. The nannies, the private schools, the clothes, it adds up. We were worried we would have to downgrade our lifestyle. But then you came along with that deed. She laughed, a soft, chilling sound. So I suppose I should thank you. That land you just signed over is going to pay for my baby's nursery. It is going to pay for the best doctors. You are not just paying off Preston's gambling debts, Audrey. You are sponsoring the next generation of the Vance family. Consider it your parting gift. She smiled, patting her belly one last time. Thanks for the donation, Auntie Audrey. She stepped back and slammed the door shut. The bolt slid home with a heavy metallic clank, sealing me back in the darkness. I sat there listening to her footsteps fade away on the gravel. Most women in my position would have felt a pang of sympathy. A baby, an innocent life. They would have thought maybe I should let them have the money for the child's sake. But I am not most women. I am a forensic accountant. I deal in facts, not feelings. And the fact was that Caroline had just admitted to funding her child's future with the proceeds of extortion and fraud. I stared at the closed door, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. I did not care if she was pregnant. I did not care if she had a newborn. In the eyes of the law, illicit gains are subject to seizure regardless of how they are spent. If that baby is fed with stolen money, I will calculate the cost of the milk and I will repossess it. If that nursery is built on my grandmother's land, I will foreclose on the crib. Caroline thought she had just justified her cruelty. In reality, she had just expanded the scope of my audit. I was not just coming for Dante and Preston anymore. I was coming for the entire legacy root and branch. I pulled my knees to my chest and waited for the dawn. The Vance family line was about to face a correction. I waited until the sound of Caroline's footsteps disappeared completely into the storm. Then I stood up and brushed the dirt from my knees. The time for acting was over. I was cold, wet, and locked in a shed, but I had never felt more powerful. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The signal was weak through the storm, but it was enough. I dialed the priority number for Sterling Thorne. He answered on the first ring. Status, he asked, his voice cutting through the static. I am currently locked in the gardening shed on the north side of the estate, I said, my voice devoid of panic. They have confiscated my personal belongings, and Caroline just admitted to extortion on tape. Remember that emergency protective order I filed ex parte this morning? I have it right here, Thorne replied. The judge granted it based on the threats Dante made at the coffee shop. They have not been served yet, so they do not know it exists. Well, I said, leaning against the rotting wood of the shed wall. By imprisoning me on the property, they have just violated the terms of an order they did not even know they were under. But more importantly, they have committed a felony. Now put me on speaker. Where are you? I could hear the rustle of papers and the low hum of an air conditioner. I am in the boardroom of First City Bank. The entire board of directors is present. They are very concerned about the stability of the Vance loans. Good, I said. Tell them the deal changes now. I could hear Thorne clear his throat. I imagined him standing at the head of the polished table looking down at the nervous bankers who were desperate to offload the toxic debt of the Vance family. Gentlemen, Thorne said, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. My client, Ms. Vance, is on the line. As of 10 minutes ago, the current management of Vance Enterprises has engaged in criminal confinement and extortion. This is no longer just a credit risk. It is a PR nightmare waiting to happen. If you do not sell the debt to us tonight by tomorrow morning, you will be holding the mortgage on a crime scene. There was a pause. I could hear the bankers muttering amongst themselves. They knew the Vance family reputation was crumbling. They knew about the embezzlement rumors. Now hearing that the family was locking women in sheds was the final straw. Banks hate risk, but they hate scandal even more. We accept, the voice of the bank chairman came through the phone, tight and anxious. We will sell the entirety of the Vance corporate debt and the personal mortgages held by this institution to your shell company. The price is 12 cents on the dollar. Just get this mess off our books. I smiled in the darkness. 12 cents. I was buying their entire life for pennies. Draft the transfer, I commanded. Wire the funds immediately. I want the title to the company and the deed to this house in my name before the sun comes up. Consider it done, Thorne said. The board is signing as we speak. Congratulations, Ms. Vance. You now own everything. I hung up the phone and looked around my prison. They thought they had trapped me. In reality, they had just handed me the keys to the kingdom. I sat back down on the bags of soil and closed my eyes. I would let them sleep one last night in what they thought was their house. When I walked out of here in the morning, I would not be a guest. I would be the landlord. For 48 hours, I simply ceased to exist. I did not return to my apartment in Cambridge. I did not log into my social media accounts to read the hundreds of new hate comments Genevieve had likely posted. I sat in the command center of my penthouse watching the monitors with the patience of a sniper. The silence from my end was driving them insane. They expected me to beg, they expected me to pound on their door demanding my clothes back. Instead, I gave them nothing. On the morning of the second day, the GPS tracker I had planted on Preston's car began to move. It traveled from the estate to the downtown offices of First American Title. I switched the audio feed to his phone. He was humming. He thought he was walking in to pick up a check for $200,000. He thought his gambling debt was resolved. I listened as he walked into the office. I heard the confident squeak of his leather shoes and the arrogant tone he used with the receptionist. I am here to close on the Berkshire property transaction, he announced. The deed transfer was submitted yesterday. I am just here for the wire confirmation. There was a long pause. I could hear the sound of typing followed by the shuffling of papers. Then a woman's voice spoke. It was cool, professional, and devastating. I am sorry, Mr. Vance, but we cannot process this transfer. The legal department flagged the document this morning. Flagged it? Preston's voice rose an octave. What do you mean flagged it? My fiancé signed that deed in front of me. It is a valid contract. The woman sighed. Actually, sir, it is not. The signature on the transfer document does not match the notarized specimen we have on file for Ms. Vance. The loop on the final letter is inverted, and there is a heavy punctuation mark where there should be none. According to our fraud detection software, this signature was either forged or made under duress. We cannot accept it. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my tea. The trap had snapped shut. This is ridiculous, Preston shouted. He was starting to panic. I watched his heart rate spike on my monitor. Call her. Call Audrey right now. She will tell you she signed it. We tried to call her, sir. The clerk replied, The number is disconnected. Unless Ms. Vance comes in here physically to verify her identity and re-sign the documents in front of a notary, this deed is just a piece of paper. We cannot release the funds. I heard the sound of a fist slamming onto a desk. Do you know who I am? Preston screamed. I need that money today. I am afraid I cannot help you, Mr. Vance. Please lower your voice, or I will have to call security. Preston stormed out of the office. The audio feed was filled with the sound of heavy breathing and the rush of city traffic. I heard him dialing my number over and over again. Pick up the phone, he hissed to himself. Pick up, you useless woman. Where are you? His voice was trembling. It was Friday. The bookies were expecting their money by 5 p.m. He had sold his soul to get that deed, and now he realized he had bought a counterfeit ticket. He was standing on a street corner with a worthless piece of paper, an angry loan shark on his tail, and a fiancé who had vanished into thin air. He dialed again, leaving a voicemail that started with threats and ended with a sob. Audrey, please, stop playing games. I need you to sign the paper again. Just answer the phone. I reached out and pressed the delete button on the recording. He was starting to realize that the silence was not surrender. It was the eye of the storm, and the hurricane was about to make landfall. Dante paced the length of his corner office, the plush carpet doing little to dampen the sound of his angry footsteps. The failed land transfer with Preston was a disaster, but he had assumed they could fix it. He assumed he could just bully the title company or force Audrey to sign again. But Audrey was gone, and the silence was starting to feel heavy. The burner phone in his inside pocket vibrated. It was a singular, harsh buzz. This was the phone he used only for his most illicit contacts. He pulled it out and answered without a greeting. We have a problem, a frantic voice whispered on the other end. It was Miller, his contact inside the risk management department of First City Bank. What kind of problem? Dante snapped, staring out at the Boston skyline. If this is about the interest payment, tell them the check is in the mail. It is not the interest, Miller hissed. It is the principal. Someone is buying your debt, Dante. All of it. They started at midnight. By the time the markets opened this morning, they had acquired 80% of your corporate liabilities. They are buying the junk bonds, the outstanding loans, even the personal mortgages attached to the company assets. Dante stopped pacing. His heart hammered against his ribs. Who is it? I do not know, Miller replied. It is a shell company. Blind trust. But they are moving fast, and they are paying cash. They are not looking to negotiate a payment plan, Dante. This is a hostile acquisition. They are coming for the kill. Dante ended the call and threw the phone onto his desk. He ran a hand over his face, trying to think. A hostile takeover. It had to be a competitor. Probably the chaotic firm across town that had been trying to edge into their territory for years. They must have smelled blood in the water after the rumors of the canceled engagement started circulating. It never once crossed his mind that the predator circling his company was the woman he had locked in a gardening shed 2 nights ago. In his mind, Audrey was a non-entity. She was a broke, emotional wreck who was probably hiding in a motel room crying over her lost love. She did not have the capital to buy lunch, let alone a multi-million-dollar debt portfolio. No, this was corporate warfare. And if they owned the debt, they could call it in immediately. They could seize the accounts. They could lock the doors. Dante looked at the large abstract painting on the far wall. Behind it lay the company safe. He knew the game was up. The company was going to sink. But he would be damned if he went down with the ship. He walked over to the painting and swung it aside, revealing the steel face of the safe. There was nearly $500,000 in untraceable cash inside, money he had skimmed from construction contracts over the last 6 months. It was his emergency fund, his getaway ticket. He would take the cash, go to the airport, and be in the Cayman Islands before the new owners even walked through the front door. He spun the dial, entering the combination with practiced ease. Right to 20, left to 10, right to 5. He grabbed the heavy handle and yanked it down. The mechanism clicked. He pulled the heavy door open, ready to stuff his briefcase with stacks of $100 bills. He was already planning his first drink on the beach. But as the door swung wide, Dante froze. The blood turned to ice in his veins. The shelves were not stacked with money. The safe was completely empty. The heavy steel door swung open, revealing the interior of the wall safe. Dante reached out his hands, trembling in anticipation of the cool touch of stacked currency. He was ready to grab the bundles of $100 bills he had been hoarding for months, the lifeline that would carry him to a non-extradition country. But his fingers grasped nothing but air. He blinked once, then twice. He leaned forward, staring into the dark metal box. It was empty. The $500,000 in untraceable cash was gone. The ledger containing the codes for his offshore accounts was gone. The emergency passports were gone. The only thing sitting in the center of the cold steel shelf was a single manila envelope. It was identical to the one Sienna had thrown at my feet in the ballroom just 48 hours ago. Dante felt the room spin. He grabbed the door of the safe to steady himself, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. This was impossible. Only he knew the combination. Only he knew the existence of this safe. He reached in and snatched the envelope. It was light, too light. He tore it open with savage desperation, hoping against hope that perhaps it contained a cashier's check or a key to a different location. But there was only a single sheet of crisp white paper inside. He unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant, sharp, and unmistakably mine. Dear Dante, the note read. I noticed you had a significant amount of liquidity sitting stagnant in this safe. As a forensic accountant, I hate to see capital wasted. You will be pleased to know that I have reallocated these funds. I hacked into your automated laundering transfer system this morning. The $500,000 you stole from the employee pension fund has been donated to the Boston Home for Orphans. Dante's eyes widened. He scanned the rest of the page. I made the donation in your name. You are now a diamond tier benefactor. I am sure the judge will look kindly on your philanthropy when he sentences you. Thank you for doing the right thing. Best regards, Audrey. Dante screamed. It was a primal sound of pure animalistic fury. He crumpled the note in his fist and threw it across the room. He scrambled for his laptop, tearing it open and frantically logging into his Cayman Island accounts. He needed to see it. He needed to believe it was a lie. He typed in his password, access granted. The screen loaded the dashboard, balance 0. He checked the transaction history. A single outgoing transfer had been executed at 9 a.m. that morning. The recipient was indeed the Boston Home for Orphans. The memo line simply read, retribution. She had not just stolen his money, she had given it away. She had taken his escape fund, his blood money, and used it to buy toys and blankets for children who had nothing. The irony was suffocating. Dante slammed the laptop shut, cracking the screen. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He was trapped. He had no cash. He had no passport. He had no leverage. The predator had been stripped of his claws. For the first time in his life, Dante felt the cold grip of genuine fear. He looked at the empty safe and realized that the gardening shed I had slept in was a paradise compared to where he was going. He was not going to the Caribbean. He was going to a federal penitentiary. And the woman he had called a nobody had just signed his booking sheet. The air in the 40th floor conference room was thin and smelled of stale coffee and fear. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, but doing nothing to warm the temperature in the room. Around the massive oval mahogany table sat 12 of the city's most powerful investors. These were men and women who could smell blood in the water from miles away, and right now, they were looking at Dante and Preston like a pack of sharks circling a wounded seal. Dante stood at the head of the table. For the first time in his career, his suit jacket was unbuttoned, and there were visible sweat stains on his collar. He gripped the edge of the podium so hard his knuckles were white. He was trying to project confidence, but his eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," Dante said, his voice tight. "I understand your concern regarding the recent market activity. It is true that there has been some movement regarding our debt structure, but I assure you, this is a strategic consolidation. We are currently in talks with a private equity firm to restructure our liabilities. This is a standard procedure to optimize our cash flow for the upcoming quarter." A heavy-set man at the end of the table slammed his hand down. His name was Mr. Sterling, a longtime investor who had known Preston's father. "Strategic consolidation," Sterling barked. "Do not insult our intelligence, Dante. We received notifications at dawn. Your debt was not restructured, it was bought. Every single cent of it. Someone has acquired a controlling interest in this company's liabilities, and they did it in cash. We want to know who it is. Is it a competitor? Is it a liquidator?" Dante opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He knew exactly who it was. The woman he had locked in a shed. The woman who had emptied his safe. But he could not say her name. Admitting that his brother's ex-fiancée had outmaneuvered him would be professional suicide. Preston stepped forward, sensing his brother was drowning. He looked even worse than Dante. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, and his hands were shaking. But he flashed his signature charm, the smile that had fooled me for 3 years. "Mr. Sterling, please," Preston said, smoothing his tie. "You are overreacting. We are fully aware of the buyer. In fact, it is a friendly acquisition." The room went quiet. Dante looked at Preston with wide eyes, terrified of what lie he was about to spin. "Friendly acquisition?" Sterling asked, skeptical. "Who has that kind of capital?" Preston took a deep breath. He looked the investors in the eye and delivered the performance of his life. "My fiancée Preston lied. As many of you know, I am engaged to Audrey Vance. She comes from considerable family wealth. We have decided to merge our assets prior to the wedding. She is simply buying out the debt to clear the books so we can start fresh. It is effectively an internal family transfer. She adores me, and she trusts my vision for this company completely. She is essentially a silent partner. I control the funds, I control the decisions." A murmur of relief went through the room. If it was just a rich wife bailing out her husband, then the company was safe. "So you are saying," Sterling asked, leaning back in his chair, "that this Audrey woman is just a purse string?" that she has no intention of interfering with management. Preston laughed, a hollow, arrogant sound. Audrey interferes with nothing. She does what I tell her to do. She is obsessed with me. The capital is ours to use as we see fit. Dante exhaled slowly, wiping his forehead. It was a brilliant lie. It bought them time. Excellent, Sterling said. Then I suppose we should meet this savior of yours. Is she coming in to sign the formal transition papers? Preston nodded, his confidence growing with his own delusion. Absolutely. She should be here any minute to pledge her loyalty to the board. As if on cue, the heavy double doors at the back of the room clicked. The lock disengaged. Every head turned. Preston smiled, thinking his submissive little fiancée was coming to save him. He had no idea he had just summoned the executioner. The double doors swung open with a heavy, authoritative thud that silenced the room instantly. Preston turned, his smile widening, expecting to see the broken, compliant woman he had locked in a shed. He expected a prop for his charade. But the woman who walked through the threshold was not broken. She was a weapon. I wore a tailored white Armani suit, sharp enough to cut glass. It was a stark contrast to the muddy cardigan I had worn the night before. I did not walk with my head down. I strode into the room with the cadence of a predator entering its territory. Flanking me on my left was Sienna, holding the black ledger against her chest like a shield. Behind us walked 5 senior partners from the most feared corporate law firm in Boston, moving in a perfect V formation. We were a phalanx of legal destruction. The air left the room. Mr. Sterling dropped his pen. Dante looked like he was having a cardiac event, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. The investors stared in stunned silence, unable to reconcile the powerful woman standing before them with the submissive, silent partner Preston had just described. Genevieve, who had been sitting in the corner nursing a morning mimosa, stood up so fast her chair tipped over with a loud crash. She saw a threat, and she reacted with the only tool she had left. Aggression. Security. She screamed, her voice cracking and echoing off the glass walls. Get her out of here. What is this trash doing in my boardroom? Call the police. She is trespassing. She is mentally unstable. She rushed toward me, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. She expected me to flinch. She expected me to cower. I did not move. I did not blink. I simply stopped in the center of the room and let her scream. I let her show the entire board exactly how unhinged she really was. Remove this filth immediately, she shrieked, grabbing the arm of the head of security, a massive man named Frank, who had worked for the family for 20 years. Frank, throw her out. Do your job. Do not just stand there, you idiot. Frank looked down at Genevieve's manicured hand, clutching his uniform. Then he looked at Dante, who was trembling at the podium. Finally, he looked at me. For years, Frank had watched this family treat people like dirt. He had watched them mistreat staff, cut corners, and abuse their power. He knew exactly who signed the checks as of this morning. Frank gently removed Genevieve's hand from his arm. He did not look at her. He straightened his tie, squared his shoulders, and turned to face me. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect I had never seen him give to Preston or Dante. Good morning, Madame Chairwoman, Frank said, his deep voice rumbling through the silent room. The security team is at your disposal. Welcome to the building. Genevieve froze. She looked at Frank as if he had spoken in tongues. Chairwoman, she whispered, the color draining from her face. What are you talking about, Frank? I am Genevieve Vance. I am the matriarch of this family. I sign your paychecks. Not anymore. Genevieve, I said, stepping past her. I walked toward the head of the table, where Dante was still clinging to the podium, like a drowning man holding onto a piece of driftwood. I looked him in the eye. You are in my seat, Dante. Move. Dante moved. He did not want to, but the sheer force of my glare combined with Frank's imposing presence left him no choice. He stumbled aside, nearly tripping over his own feet, and I took the seat at the head of the table. I placed my hands on the leather armrests. It felt right. It felt like destiny. I looked around the table at the 12 men and women who controlled the city's capital. They were staring at me with a mixture of confusion and awe. Preston was right about one thing, I said, my voice calm and commanding. I am an heiress, and I am bringing significant capital into this merger. But he was wrong about everything else. I am not a silent partner. I am not submissive. And I certainly do not trust his vision. I picked up the thick file folder Sienna had placed in front of me. I held it up for a moment, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. Then I dropped it onto the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy thud that sounded like a gavel sentencing them to death. You spent 3 years calling me a nobody, Preston. You called me an orphan. You mocked my lack of connections. You thought I was just a poor girl, lucky enough to catch a rich man. You never once asked about my father. You never asked about my grandfather. I stood up slowly, leaning over the table. My name is not just Audrey. My name is Audrey Vance. I am the sole surviving granddaughter of William Vance. The reaction was instantaneous. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Mr. Sterling's eyes went wide. Even Genevieve stopped hyperventilating. William Vance was not just a businessman. He was a titan. He was the industrialist who had built half of Boston. His name was spoken with reverence in financial circles. He was a legend. Preston's knees buckled. He collapsed into his chair as if his strings had been cut. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. For years he had strutted around using the Vance name, claiming it made him royalty. But he was just a distant cousin, a pretender clinging to the coattails of a legacy he did not build. He had always worshipped the legend of William Vance. He had idolized the power, and now he realized that the woman he had treated like garbage, the woman he had forced to sleep in a shed, was the direct heir to the throne he so desperately wanted. I opened the file, revealing the transfer documents. William Vance left his entire estate to me in a blind trust. I continued, my eyes locking on Preston's terrified face. I have used those resources to purchase 51% of this company's outstanding shares and 100% of its debt. I smiled a cold, sharp smile. I am not just your fiancé, Preston. I am not just your creditor. I am your owner, and I am liquidating everything. I nodded to Sienna. She connected the HDMI cable to her laptop with a sharp click. The lights in the boardroom dimmed automatically, and the massive screen behind me hummed to life. A complex web of red and blue lines appeared, overlaying the company's organizational chart with its bank transaction history. It looked less like a financial report and more like a map of a crime scene. "Gentlemen," I said, pointing a laser presenter at the screen. "You were told that the liquidity crisis was due to market volatility. That is a lie. The hemorrhage is internal. I have spent the last 48 hours conducting a forensic audit of the last 5 fiscal years. What I found was not incompetence, it was systemic looting." I clicked the remote. The screen zoomed in on a cluster of transactions. Let us start with the Cayman Islands, specifically an entity known as Horizon Global Solutions. According to the company ledger, this firm provides strategic consulting. In the last 18 months, you have wired exactly $2.4 million to their accounts. Dante jumped up, his face red. That is a legitimate vendor. They are our external advisors. I clicked the remote again. A satellite image appeared on the screen showing a small rundown shack on a beach in Grand Cayman. "This is the headquarters of Horizon Global Solutions," I said, my voice dry and cutting. "It is a mailbox rental service next to a surf shop. It has no employees, no website, and no phone number. The only thing it has is a direct link to a private account held by Dante Vance. That is called layering Dante. It is the first step of money laundering, and you did not even do a good job of it." The investors began to murmur furiously. Mr. Sterling looked ready to explode. I moved the laser dot to a second column. And here we have the operating expenses. $500,000 categorized under client acquisition and entertainment. I pulled up the itemized receipts. They were not for client dinners. They were for charter jets to Vegas, invoices from high-end escort services, and a massive singular payment to a bookie known as the Shark. "You used shareholder money to fund your lifestyle," I said, looking directly at Preston. "You stripped the copper out of the walls to pay for your parties. This is not business expenses. This is embezzlement. This is grand larceny." Dante slammed his hand on the table. "These are fabrications. She hacked the system. She altered the data. You cannot trust her." I turned to him, my expression pitiful. Dante, in forensic accounting, we have a saying. You can change the spreadsheet, but you cannot change the bank metadata. Every single one of these transfers is time-stamped and verified by the clearinghouse. I have the SWIFT codes. I have the IP addresses used to authorize the transfers. And guess where the IP address traces back to? I clicked one final time. The screen showed the login location. Your iPad, Dante. The one currently sitting in your briefcase. I turned back to the stunned board of directors. This company is not failing. It is being robbed. And I just caught the thieves red-handed. The evidence is irrefutable. I suggest you call the federal prosecutors before they call you as accomplices. The room erupted into chaos, but I stood still in the eye of the storm, watching Dante and Preston shrink under the weight of the truth. Dante's composure did not just crack. It shattered. He lunged toward the projection screen, as if he could physically claw the incriminating data out of existence. His face was a map of vein-popping fury, and his eyes bulged with the desperation of a man watching his life disintegrate. Fabrication, he roared, spitting the words out. This is all fake. She hacked my personal server. This is inadmissible. She planted those files to frame me because I fired her. He turned to Mr. Sterling, grabbing the lapels of the investor's jacket. You cannot listen to this vengeful woman. She is a criminal. She broke into my digital property. This is corporate espionage. I will have her arrested. I will have her thrown in a cell. I waited for him to run out of breath. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I stood in the center of the room, calm and immovable, a lighthouse in the middle of his storm. Hacking implies you had security worth breaking, Dante. I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria. I did not touch your private server. I simply reconciled your internal ledger with the public filings you submitted to the SEC. It is called math, and unfortunately for you, the math does not lie. Dante backed away, shaking his head violently. No. No. You need a warrant for this. You cannot just walk in here and accuse me. I checked my watch. The timing was impeccable. You are absolutely right, Dante, I replied. I cannot arrest you. I am just an accountant. But I figured you would say that, so I forwarded my preliminary findings to the Economic Crimes Unit 3 hours ago. They were very interested in your creative accounting. And regarding the warrant, I pointed toward the double doors. I believe they have one. As if on cue, the doors swung open again. This time, it was not Frank. 4 agents in Navy windbreakers, emblazoned with FBI, stepped into the room. They moved with the heavy, inevitable momentum of justice. The room went deathly silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. A tall agent with a buzz cut stepped forward, holding a piece of paper. Dante Vance, he asked, though he clearly knew the answer. Dante stumbled back, hitting the glass wall. You have the wrong person. This is a mistake. My lawyers will fix this. The agent did not argue. He did not negotiate. He simply crossed the room in 3 strides, spun Dante around, and slammed him against the glass. The sound of metal cuffs ratcheting shut echoed like a gunshot in the silent boardroom. Dante Vance, you are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The agent recited, his voice bored and routine. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Dante struggled uselessly against the restraints. He looked over his shoulder at me, his eyes wide with terror, begging for a mercy I did not possess. Audrey, please. He whimpered, all the arrogance gone. Tell them it is a misunderstanding. We are family. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had tried to institutionalize me to steal my inheritance. We are not family, Dante, I said coldly. You are a liability, and I just wrote you off. The agents dragged him out of the room, his expensive Italian loafers dragging across the carpet. I watched him go until the doors closed behind him. Then I turned back to the table where Preston was sitting, paralyzed with shock. One down, I said, smoothing my blazer. Who is next? The chaos in the hallway was audible even through the thick glass walls of the conference room. Caroline, who had been waiting outside to celebrate their victory, was now chasing the FBI agents down the corridor. Her high heels clattered frantically against the marble floor. She was screaming Dante's name, clawing at the agents' uniforms, desperate to stop them from taking her husband and her future away. "Dante, do not leave me," she wailed, her voice shrill and terrified. "What about the baby? What about the money? You promised me." I watched through the glass as Dante looked back at her. There was no love in his eyes. There was only the cold realization that she was just another burden he could no longer afford. He shook his head and turned away, allowing the agents to shove him into the elevator. The doors slid shut, severing the Vance family head from its body. Caroline collapsed on the floor in a heap of designer silk, weeping for a lifestyle that was already dead. Inside the boardroom, the silence was replaced by the frantic buzzing of cell phones. The news had hit the wire. "Ms. Vance," Mr. Sterling shouted, looking at his tablet with wide eyes. "The stock is in free fall. We are down 40% in 10 minutes. Trading has been halted. The street thinks the company is dissolving. We are losing millions by the second." I remained seated, my hands folded calmly on the table. "Let it fall," I said, my voice steady. "I am not interested in the stock price, Mr. Sterling. I am interested in the assets. I have already filed the paperwork to delist the company. As of this afternoon, Vance Enterprises is going private. I am scrubbing the Vance name off the building and restructuring the entire operation under my own holding company." I looked around the table at the terrified board members. "You have two choices. You can sell your remaining shares to me right now for the current market price, which is pennies. Or you can hold on to them and go down with the ship during the federal investigation." It took them less than a minute to decide. One by one, they nodded defeated. They were signing over their legacy to me. I had not just won the battle, I had conquered the kingdom. Finally, the room cleared, leaving only one person behind. Preston. He stood by the window looking out at the city he used to think he owned. He looked smaller now. The arrogance that had defined him for 3 years had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell of a man. He turned slowly to face me. His face was pale and his eyes were empty. He had lost his brother to prison. He had lost his mother to humiliation. He had lost the family fortune to the very woman he had planned to defraud. And worst of all, he realized he had lost me. "Audrey," he whispered, his voice cracking. "We could have—" "Stop," I said, cutting him off. "Do not finish that sentence." I stood up and walked over to him, stopping just outside of arm's reach. "You wanted a wealthy wife, Preston. You wanted a woman with a pedigree, a woman who could secure your future. You had her. She was sleeping in your bed for 3 years. She was fixing your books and tolerating your mother. But you were too greedy to see it. You treated a diamond like it was glass, and now you have cut yourself." Preston reached out a hand, trembling. "I can change. I can be better. Please, Audrey, I have nothing." I looked at his hand. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just indifference. "You have exactly what you deserve," I said. I turned my back on him and walked toward the door. "Security will escort you out, Preston. You have 5 minutes to clear your desk. After that, you are trespassing on my property. And Preston, take your mother with you. I have a company to run." I walked out of the boardroom, leaving the ruins of the Vance Empire behind me. The hallway was long and lined with portraits of dead men who would have been ashamed of their descendants. I felt a sense of lightness I had not felt in years. The heavy weight of the secrets, the lies, and the constant need to make myself small was finally gone. I was expanding to fill the space I had purchased. I was halfway to the elevators when I heard the frantic clicking of heels behind me. I did not speed up. I knew who it was. There was a desperation in those footsteps that was unmistakable. "Audrey. Audrey, wait." A hand clamped onto my forearm. It was Genevieve. 10 minutes ago, she had been screaming for security to throw me out. Yesterday, she had forced me to clean her shoes with my sleeve. But now, as she swung around to face me, she was wearing a smile so bright and artificial it looked like it had been stapled onto her face. "Audrey, my darling." She panted, breathless from the run. Her mascara was smeared and her hair was disheveled, but she was trying to channel the benevolent matriarch. "Where are you going in such a rush? We have so much to discuss. I am so proud of you." I looked at her hand gripping the sleeve of my white Armani blazer. I did not speak. I just looked at her fingers. Genevieve laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. "Oh, stop looking at me like that. You know how we are. We are intense people. The Vances are forged in fire." She squeezed my arm tighter, leaning in conspiratorially. "You know, I never really hated you, right? The shed, the insults, the lawsuit, it was all a test. We had to be sure you were strong enough to carry the family name. We had to break you down to build you up. And look at you now. You are magnificent. You are a shark, just like us." She reached up with her other hand to stroke my cheek. "You passed the test, darling. You are one of us now. I always knew you had it in you. Now let us go back inside and fix this. We can run the company together, mother and daughter. What do you say?" I slowly reached up and peeled her fingers off my arm one by one. Her grip was clammy and weak. I held her hand away from me for a second, letting her feel the rejection, and then I dropped it. It fell to her side like a dead weight. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a silk handkerchief. With slow, deliberate movements, I began to wipe the spot on my sleeve where she had touched me. I scrubbed the fabric as if she had left a smear of toxic waste. "You are confused, Genevieve," I said, my voice low and devoid of warmth. "I am not your daughter. I am your landlord. And I am your creditor." Genevieve's smile faltered, the corners of her mouth twitching. "Audrey, please. Do not be like this. We are family." "Family," I repeated, folding the handkerchief and tossing it into a nearby trash can. "You made me kneel in the mud. You told me my grandmother's legacy was just dirt to pay for your nursery. You treated me like an animal because you thought I was poor. Now that you know I am rich, suddenly I am family." I took a step closer to her, and she shrank back, hitting the wall. "That is not love, Genevieve. That is parasitism. And I am the cure." I leaned in close enough to smell the stale alcohol on her breath. "You have 24 hours to vacate the estate. I have appraisers coming on Monday, and I do not want to see a single trace of you or your sons in my house. If you are still there when the sun goes down tomorrow, I will have Frank physically remove you." "But where will I go?" she whispered, tears finally spilling over, genuine tears of terror. "I have nowhere." I looked at her with the same cold indifference she had shown me for 3 years. "I hear the gardening shed is unlocked," I said. I turned and walked toward the elevator, leaving her slumped against the wall, sobbing into her hands. The doors opened, and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby. I did not look back. I had one last loose end to tie up before I started my new life. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the bustling lobby of the building I now owned. I stepped out, expecting to walk straight to my car and leave this chapter of my life behind forever. But Preston was not done. He had taken the service stairs, sprinting down 40 flights to cut me off. He stood in front of the revolving doors, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his forehead, his tie undone. He looked like a man who had just run a marathon to stop an execution. "Audrey, wait. Please, just listen to me." He stepped in front of me, blocking my path to the exit. The employees in the lobby stopped what they were doing. The receptionists, the security guards, the delivery couriers. Everyone turned to watch the fallen prince beg. I stopped. I did not step back. I let him stand there, panting and pathetic. "Get out of my way, Preston," I said, my voice carrying over the low hum of the lobby. "No, I will not let you leave thinking this is who I am," he pleaded, reaching out as if to grab my shoulders, but stopping short when he saw the look in my eyes. "You have to understand, Dante is a shark. I had to play his game. All those things I said in the boardroom about you being submissive, about you being a silent partner, it was just talk. It was locker room talk, Audrey. I was just trying to protect us." He laughed nervously, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "I love you. You know I love you. We have been together for 3 years. You cannot throw that away because of a few bad words." I was stressed. I was under pressure. "But I am your fiancé. We are a team. We can still do this. We can rule this company together just like you said." I looked at him. I really looked at him. For years I had convinced myself that beneath his vanity and his gambling addiction there was a good man. I had convinced myself that he needed me. But standing there under the harsh lobby lights, I saw him clearly for the first time. He did not love me. He loved what I could do for him. He loved the safety net I provided. I took a step closer, invading his personal space. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the clinical detachment of a coroner pronouncing a time of death. "You do not love me, Preston. You do not even know me." "But I do," he stammered. "I know everything about you." "No, you don't," I interrupted. "You know the version of me I let you see. You love the quiet girl who fixed your mistakes. You love the accountant who hid your debts. You love the prop that made you look like a family man. You loved my shadow Preston because it was the only thing small enough to make you feel big." I gestured to the massive glass walls around us, to the empire he had lost. "But the shadow is gone. And now that the light is shining on you, you look very small." I checked the Rolex on my wrist. It was a men's watch, my grandfather's watch. "You are fired, Preston. Effective immediately. Your access to the building has been revoked. Your company credit cards have been cancelled. And your car has been repossessed." He stared at me, his mouth agape, the reality finally crashing down on him. "Fired. You cannot fire me. I am a Vance. You are an employee," I corrected him. "And a redundant one at that." I signaled to Frank, the head of security, who was standing by the reception desk. He walked over immediately, his face grim. "Frank, escort Mr. Vance to his office. Watch him pack. He is to take only personal items. No files, no hard drives, and absolutely no company property." I looked back at Preston one last time. "You have 15 minutes to clear out your desk. If you are still in this building at 10:15, Frank will throw you out on the sidewalk. And Preston, do not forget your stapler. You are going to need it for your resume." I sidestepped him and walked through the revolving doors. I stepped out into the fresh air of the Boston morning. The sun was shining. The traffic was moving. The world was turning. And for the first time in my life, I was driving the car. The gavel struck the mahogany-sounding block with a finality that made Dante flinch. There was no charm left in him, and no expensive legal team to weave loopholes around the truth. The federal prosecutor had used the black ledger I provided to paint a picture of greed so vivid that the jury took less than an hour to return a verdict. 10 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and money laundering. As the bailiffs clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists, Dante looked back at the gallery, scanning the faces for sympathy. He found none. He was led away through the side door, his Italian suit replaced by the promise of an orange jumpsuit. The mastermind of the Vance family was gone, leaving the rest of the pack to fend for themselves in a world they were ill-equipped to survive. The eviction of Genevieve and Preston was far less dignified than a court proceeding. I did not oversee it personally. I simply instructed the bank to execute the foreclosure immediately. The sheriff's deputies arrived at the estate at dawn, giving them 1 hour to vacate the premises. They left with only what they could carry in cardboard boxes. Their destination was not a luxury condo or a boutique hotel. It was a third-floor walk-up in a crumbling tenement building in Dorchester. The kind of neighborhood Genevieve used to make jokes about at charity galas. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and stale cigarette smoke. The wallpaper was peeling in long yellow strips like dead skin. Genevieve sat on a stained mattress that had been left by the previous tenant, clutching her pearl necklace as if it were a rosary. She stared at the water stain on the ceiling, unable to comprehend how her life had collapsed so completely. "This must be a mistake," she muttered to the peeling walls. "We are Vances. We do not live in places like this. Preston, call the concierge. Tell them the heating is too loud." Preston stood by the window looking out at the alleyway filled with overflowing dumpsters. He did not answer her. He knew there was no concierge. There was only the landlord who would come knocking for rent they could barely afford. He looked at his hands, the hands that had never done a day of hard labor in their life. He realized with a sickening clarity that he was going to have to learn how to work. The fantasy was over. The shadow he had feared had finally swallowed him whole. Across town, the reality of the New World Order was hitting Caroline even harder. The baby was coming, and the trust fund was gone. She had no husband to support her and no inheritance to fall back on. She had applied for office jobs, but without Dante's connections, she was just an applicant with no skills and a bad attitude. The bell above the door of the Rusty Spoon diner jingled. Caroline wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, pushing a stray lock of hair out of her eyes. She was wearing a polyester uniform that smelled of fryer grease and old coffee. Her feet were swollen and aching in cheap non-slip shoes. "Hey, honey, more coffee over here!" a truck driver shouted from booth 4, snapping his fingers at her. Caroline froze. It was the exact same gesture she had used on waitstaff for her entire life. The dismissal, the entitlement, the demand for service without a shred of respect. She swallowed her pride, tasting the bitterness of it. She grabbed the coffee pot and walked over, forcing a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Coming right up, sir," she said, her voice flat. She poured the coffee, watching the dark liquid swirl in the mug. She caught her reflection in the window. She looked tired. She looked worn. She looked like exactly the kind of person she used to despise. She placed the pot back on the warmer and touched her stomach. She was not raising a prince. She was raising a survivor. And for the first time in her life, Caroline understood the value of $1 because she finally had to earn one. The office on the 40th floor no longer looked like a mausoleum to dead men's egos. I had stripped away the heavy mahogany paneling and the dark velvet curtains. The space was now flooded with natural light, filled with sleek glass furniture and vibrant modern art. It smelled of fresh orchids and success. I sat in the executive chair, swiveled toward the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the sprawling city of Boston. From up here, the people looked like ants, and the problems that had once seemed insurmountable were invisible. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of a life that was finally, truly mine. The door opened softly. Sienna walked in carrying a porcelain tray. She was no longer the nervous assistant hiding in the archives. She was the chief of staff, and she wore her new authority with the same grace she wore her tailored suit. She placed a cup of Earl Grey tea on the desk, the steam rising in a delicate curl. "Your 2 o'clock meeting with the Asian expansion team is confirmed," Sienna said, checking her tablet. "But before that, there is something I thought you might find amusing." She tapped the screen and slid the tablet across the glass desk toward me. "HR just flagged an application that came through the automated system this morning. It is for an entry-level position in the night security detail." I looked down at the screen. The photo attached to the resume was familiar, though the man in it looked older and more tired than I remembered. It was Preston. Under the experience section, he had listed former CEO of Vance Enterprises. It was pathetic. He was applying to guard the building he used to own. He was applying to work for Frank. Sienna watched me, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Do you want me to flag it for an interview? It might be entertaining to watch Frank conduct his performance review." I stared at the face of the man who had once held my future in his hands. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, no satisfaction. He was just a ghost, a glitch in the system that had already been corrected. I picked up the tablet and handed it back to her. "No," I said, my voice calm and final. "Do not interview him. Do not reject him. Just delete it." Sienna raised an eyebrow. "You do not even want to keep it as a souvenir." I turned back to the window, watching a plane cut across the blue sky. "No need," I replied. "The future has no room for trash." Sienna smiled, deleted the file with a swipe of her finger, and turned to leave. As the door clicked shut, my private line began to ring. It was a soft melodic tone, distinct from the jarring buzz of the general office phone. I reached out and pressed the answer button. "Audrey Vance speaking?" "Good afternoon, Audrey." A deep, warm voice filled the room. It was Julian, the managing partner of the London firm we were merging with. His voice was steady, respectful, and held a note of genuine admiration that Preston had never been capable of. "I have reviewed your proposal for the European restructure. It is brilliant. I was hoping we could discuss it over dinner tonight. I am flying in this afternoon." I felt a smile spread across my face. It was not the guarded smile of a woman trying to survive. It was the radiant, open smile of a woman who had already won. "I would like that very much, Julian," I said. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the horizon where the ocean met the sky. The storm was over, the sun was shining, and the view from the top was spectacular. Fade to black. The story of Audrey Vance serves as a brutal yet beautiful reminder that silence is not synonymous with weakness, and arrogance is often the architect of its own destruction. The Vance family's downfall was not caused solely by Audrey's revenge. It was caused by their own catastrophic underestimation of the woman standing right in front of them. They looked at her and saw only what they wanted to see, a nobody, a prop, a shadow. They mistook her patience for submission and her kindness for naivety. However, the most profound lesson lies in the power of competence over charisma. Preston and Dante relied on their name, their image, and their bluster to navigate the world. They believed they were untouchable simply because they were loud. Audrey conversely relied on hard skills, data, and the irrefutable truth of numbers. In a world filled with noise, she proved that facts are the ultimate weapon. She didn't need to scream to be heard, she just needed to show the ledger. Ultimately, Audrey teaches us that true worth comes from within. She did not let the insults of a toxic family define her reality. She knew her value long before she revealed her bank account. She accepted the mud, the shed, and the scorn because she knew the game she was playing. Victory belongs to those who prepare in the dark so they can shine in the light. It is a testament to the fact that you should never let anyone treat you like a secondary character in your own life. Are you ready to stop living in the shadows of others and start writing your own chapter of triumph? Start building your own ledger of skills and self-worth today, because the best revenge is not just surviving, but thriving.